Oh yeah, thanks for that, Imran. That was brilliant. So we are now going back to our talks. So our next speaker is Duncan, and Duncan joins us from the Scottish Government, where he's worked for 2 years. In performance analysis, he has worked with content, service, and policy teams to understand user interactions with existing web presences and to set goals and targets for future ones. Please welcome Duncan to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for that welcome. As mentioned, my name is Duncan MacGruer. I work for the Scottish Government. Scotland is a small, cold and wet, but very friendly country that is 200 miles north of where you're sitting. And the government exists to supply a range of services to our citizens, and things like legal, health, education, and some benefits. I want to talk about how performance analysis works in our design system. Today's topic is around the unsung heroes of the design system. And given that I'm going to spend about the next 20 minutes talking about what I do for a living, it feels a little bit self-serving, not humble. But I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to push on through and have a great old time. Where I'd like to hit off today is, what is a performance analyst? If you've never worked with one before, if you don't know what that job role is within the UCD family, I'm going to cover that off first. I would like to talk about the value of design systems. I know there was a question before the break. I'm going to have my go at answering that one. I'd also like to provide a few case studies of our recent work, so some of the things that performance analysts can do, some of the questions they can help you frame, and some of the answers they can provide for you. But I'd also like to look at some of our future challenges as well, so some of the things that we've not yet solved, so to give you, a little break from my bragging, my self-serving presentation. There'll be some ideas there in ways that you can help me after the fact as well. So what do performance analysts do? They analyze performance, right? So that was nice. On to it. There are about half a dozen performance analysts within the Scottish Government, and my small team is just of 3. And what we do is to work with people who provide services and products to understand what the purpose of those things is and how we can measure them as they go, to understand whether they're working well for the people that they're designed to assist. Some of this is done through developing performance measurement frameworks. That's a really lovely idea that it kind of works in conjunction with some service design ideals to look at various stages of journeys along using websites, products, and other things, where there are opportunities to use measurement to understand how people are using services and how they can be optimized. Now, my good friends at GDS have already done some of the work here, so I'll let you follow this link if you want to read more. In my little team, and this icon is not sort of to give you an idea, there's 3 of us that work in this little team. We work in the digital publishing area, so it's the technical delivery area that provides sort of the central government websites. And we use reporting insights to help people understand how those are being used. So how people are navigating around those sites, what's being used, how it's being used, where people are having problems. But we also work within the design systems so that people can take our ideals and how we work and apply it to their own websites. Most people don't want to learn how to do this, and I can understand sometimes why. So if they can take on a range of work that you've already done and apply it to their own work, then it's great to do so. And how we track our design system, without going too far down a sort of rabbit hole of performance analysis, because I will, we use data attributes. So everything that you can click on, interact with, see, and do within our design system has a little data attribute attached to it. Now, it's really valuable because we can use this in a range of tools to understand how those sites work, primarily through Google Tag Manager. Other tag management services are available. We use GTM, though, to pick up those data attributes and set off triggers that allow us to see how people are using it. It goes into the vast database of Google Analytics. Other analytics softwares are available. We track them and try and understand how people are using things. I mentioned here that it's future-proofed. It's really valuable to us to be able to use those data attributes. The old way of you doing this was through CSS attributes, which are kind of subject to change, and when people are reusing in their own systems and so on, those can be changed and kind of come out from underneath you, so we don't prefer to work that way. So we feel confident about the future of how these things are done, but it also minimizes the amount of work we have to do, which is like a huge benefit for me, because I'm pretty lazy. It minimizes the number of tags that we need to work with. It minimizes the number of filterings that we need to do when we want to understand how people use them. It's pretty similar to how GDS do theirs, but if you want to see how we do it, Scottish Government Analytics Design System. Now, before the break, there was a question about the value of design systems. And the way I approach this thinking is that things have a purpose. Services and products kind of have a reason for existing, and that's kind of where the value sort of inherently comes from. Now, a design system, I'm sure your design system is lovely, and it's the prettiest thing on the planet, but it isn't like a lovely statue to be looked at and admired. It has a reason for being created. And it's usually to do with customer understanding, right? So you're looking at disjointed journeys. If you can at least bring some consistency to how people move through things, it's much easier to navigate, reduces friction and frustration. It also reduces risk across your organization, right? So if you're not confident that you're meeting your accessibility requirements, you bring in consistency of design and application. So you're reducing accessibility problems. But also, it's like a dirty word to talk about the cost of these things. It reduces the cost. It increases productivity of our developers or designers. It lets people do things faster and better. It doesn't feel unreasonable for someone sitting with a budget to say, this design system costs me X million. What is that doing? What is this money being spent on? It makes me recoil in horror as someone extremely British to talk about the money that these things cost. But ultimately, I think we kind of have to come to some of that. Now, my designers don't resent every fiber of my being, I trust, and I want to keep it that way. So I'm not going to sit over the shoulder with a stopwatch and look at how long it takes them to do things. Luckily, though, Figma have done that for me. They sat with a stopwatch over the shoulder of their developers. People with design systems build things faster. They found about a third faster, but in other contexts, this could be a little bit different. It's quicker to build things. It's less risky, and it is better for your users. We believe these things to be self-evident. But certainly we can measure them. Certainly we have a shot at measuring them. Normally we use sort of proxy measures, though, things like downloads of the design system or newsletter sign-ups and these kind of, that are not directly about whether the design system's good, but give us an indicator, a key indicator of the performance of these things that are moving us towards where we want to be. And now some things that we've been doing recently, some things that performance analysts do and work with. I have some filtering, so some work we've done with search recently, some of our guide types, some in-page interactions, and lastly, some people working through some of the materials that we have. I'm not clicking this hard enough. Search. So most websites are going to have one of these in place. On a simpler site, so something with a few hundred pages, search is going to be pretty simple normally because people's searches are not that diverse. The search engine is likely to bring back quality results at the top because there's not that many things to work through. But on a government website, this is an example from Gov.UK. On a government website, it's often necessary to narrow down the range of results that you're given to try and locate the thing that you're looking for. My example here is potato exports, which you wouldn't necessarily think is a popular search term, but it's one that we often are use in our examples. When we built these filters that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, the amount of work that our developers had to do was reduced massively because we're reusing small pieces that we've already built. So we've already built drop-downs and checkboxes and date pickers and these things. What our guys can do is bring those together into one place to form a sort of a new combination. And it's also really good for me that they can do that because these triggers, these things that you can click on, I've already got those data attributes that I mentioned. So I don't have to do any work here. I know that these things are going to track out of the box. Duncan doesn't need to go and do any work, which is great. I just need to filter down to these pages to look at and understand the interactions that people are having. So it's reduced time for me, it's reduced the risk of things not tracking, and it's made it much easier for our developers to do things. So who knew people would be interested in, Brexit and FOIs and these things? I think we knew that coming in. We kind of had our suspicions. But what we can look at and see is that there are elements of this taxonomy that people are not interested in. So things that people are not interacting with at all. And it makes us go back and question in content design why those things are happening. If we didn't know that people were acting in this way, we might continue doing these things that are not optimal. And I love me search, I really do. Why do people search the way they do? If this was a really answerable question. How do people assess? How do they narrow down results? What elements of the search result do they find important? When do they narrow things down? When do they feel the need to look at things from a specific time range? Do we have multiple versions of pages that are about different time ranges that people get confused by? So all of these types of questions we can ask and answer with this. We also found while doing this, I also run the searches that people run, right? So I go through and actually run those searches to make sure that they're working correctly. When doing this, I found that people in the Find Your Local Council in Scotland were disproportionately putting in their own postcode to this page. Now, if you search our website for your postcode, nothing's going to come up. We don't have a page that lists postcodes. My guess is that what they're doing is being confused by this and searching for the local council at the top. I don't know that for sure, but it's fuel for our user researchers to go away and work out why people are acting in this way. Do they not know that down is where you go on a website? Or is this search bar just not labeled very well? What is the interaction here? So again, I'm taking the information that comes from our search database and helping the other people around me improve, answer questions, and iterate down. I also used to do this for the University of Edinburgh, so if you want to read about the kind of methodology for improving your search, by all means do. The second question that we've looked at and answered recently is step by step. So within the design system, of course, you have the small components that people can, the checkbox you can click on, the drop down that you can use. This is one of our kind of molecules, right? So one of the things where they're all kind of put together. This is a guide about how to go bankrupt, so what it is to go bankrupt. And the interest I have here is on the right-hand side of this desktop experience, on the left, there's a set of, there's an interactive content guide on the right. Now, I'm interested in how people interact with that, because it's a new thing, we've designed it, we've added it to the website. Is it helpful? Are people using it? Aggregated data, so that is all the data thrown together, is not useful in this one, because it just provides 1,500 people saw it, 500 people clicked it, but doesn't really tell us a great deal. But by breaking that down into people using desktops, see a lot on the left, and mobiles, you don't see so much on the right. Some really interesting thoughts start to emerge. So on the left, using enhanced scroll tracking, so out of the box, Google Analytics 4 provides, did you get to the very end of the page, or 90%, which is a thing, but not really that instructive. By looking at sort of gradations of that, so did people get to a quarter, half, 75%, you start to see that everyone on the desktop saw the thing on the right, but didn't click on it, because they don't really see it as something interactive. They also can see the contents at the top really easily, just by scrolling up and down. So people on desktops act different to people on mobile phones, who scroll down through all the content, very rarely see this thing, because it's placed at the bottom of the page. When they do see it, they click on it a lot. So they find it extremely helpful to be able to move through it at the bottom of the page, but don't often realize it's there, because there's a massive next button sitting above it. So actually, something about where these are positioned on the mobile is a little bit confusing to people. When they see it, they love it, but they don't see it often. So by breaking up the sets of people that are using our design systems into groups, and that can be about the technology that they're using, when they experienced it, the types of things they were looking to get into, we can start to form meaningful conclusions. The third thing I want to look at is hide this page. Now, this is a small interaction that exists on some of the most sensitive content on our site. So things like instituting legal proceedings, divorce, child adoption, domestic abuse, these types of really, really vital government services. What it does is when you interact with it, it kind of obscures what you've been doing, opens Google, opens BBC Weather, so it looks like if you need to get out of the page in a hurry, you can. It came across our attention recently because actually there's some accessibility issues with this. It tends to obscure content. So it's definitely something we're looking at. But again, looking at the types of content that people are using this on, when it's important, when they need to use the ability to either click on it or press escape. It turns out that people need a desktop to read really long legalese sort of information. It allows our designers to look at, to understand, and it also informs people doing user research in these areas about the types of ways that people are interacting with it. And again, this is this most sensitive area of what we do, I would argue. So it's really important to get that right, to ask people good questions and not intimidate them. The fourth area we've been doing work in, it's about form flow. So this form, it was about housing Ukrainian nationals, so at the start of the crisis in that country. What this form flow allows us to visualize is how people move through the form, how they interact with it. Do they get to the end of the form better. They question yes or no, or answer yes or no to various questions. Are there areas where they drop out of the form? Are we asking them questions that surprise them? Do they not have a passport? Do they not have a mortgage number to hand? Wherever that might be. Are there loop behaviors? Are people clicking back in the middle of this form because they're confused by what they see? So a lot of reasons people interact with the form in weird ways. Again, by technology, is there enough on the screen for a mobile phone? Is it obvious how you move through these things? So again, by breaking down the types of people using them, I can understand how people move through this better. Now, unfortunately, because of some of the way some of our forms are built, it's really difficult to do this. And that informs a discussion with our technical guys about how they build forms, about how those interactions work out. Because if we want to see this, which I think is quite a nice visualization, but if we want to see this kind of thing, we need to do our work in a certain way. And without performance analysts, they might not know that that's an important thing to do. Now, I mentioned at the start that it was a challenge to my humility to stand and talk about my job as like a hero. But definitely it's not the case that we can answer everything. There are some things that still provide a significant challenge to the ways we work and the value that we can bring to the Scottish Government, to the design system that we're working on. Things are messy, so things are often messy when you're dealing with like a regional government that's dealing with some things that are devolved from the UK and some things that remain with the UK and some things that sit with local authorities and some services that are broken down not only by who provides them, but who gets them. So is it by a demographic issue? Is it something about your economic circumstances? What is it that decides whether you get a bus pass, whether you get a certain benefit? Because these are provided by different organizations who build their websites in certain ways, there isn't a colossal amount of kind of transparency between some of those agencies. So it makes it really difficult for Duncan, the analyst, to work through how people are interacting with them, how they're getting value from those services. So it's tricky. But it does mean that this sort of, the person with the spreadsheet, I mentioned at the start, the budget person with the X millions, is this service good? Is it providing value? That's really difficult to answer. As one sort of concrete example of what I'm talking about there, here is someone, not unreasonably, questioning whether they are entitled to a bus pass, free bus pass in Scotland. And if you search free bus pass Scotland, you're presented with 4 options: the freebus.scot, the mygov.scot, which is my site, but whether you would have heard of it or not is a different matter, the entitlementcard.org.uk, the gov.uk. And from each of those, there are further options into the Transport Agency of the Scottish Government, into Get Your NEC, so now we've got acronyms into the mix here, the smarttravel.scot. And I think only someone with kind of villainy in their heart would consciously design an experience like this. But it's what happens if you've got an organically grown estate that's out there and working. I have only got sight of the analytics of 2 of these, a little bit of knowledge of how many people are Googling this thing, and we do know how many bus passes were given out, but how people are getting them is kind of a really impossible question for us to answer right now, because lots of work that needs to be done. My contention is that can be done by establishing performance frameworks. This is our understanding of people, how people move through things, establishing measurement points, and working with people to get transparent analysis. The thing about the frameworks, though, that we need to agree what a service is, and that isn't as simple a matter as you might imagine. Some people would consider it to be renewing a passport, getting a passport, whereas if I, the person on the street, look at that as the passport service. Or even worse, something about education. I'm looking for a place for my child in a nursery that leads to a school that needs to, and this is across so many organizations, so many touch points, that we need some accountability for sure, some governance that says, this is what this service is, this is the person responsible for it, they make decisions. But what's clear is that I'm not going to be able to do that on my own, as much as I believe in the power of performance analysis. Useful mappings of services have to be done with lots of people. So how people understand them, how users on the street understand these things, as well as people who are experts in the service operating, how it works, how people interact. So definitely the values of user-centered design are important in getting towards a solution for this. But absolutely, we need to work with a large range of people in order to kind of get towards where we want to be. So it's only by, although I'm up here, I'm saying performance analysts are unsung heroes, but we all know that it's only by working together as a large group of people with a common endeavor, common understanding, that people will be able to get true value from these things. Oh, my final thank you slide is gone. That's cool. But thanks very much for your time. Thanks for having me on.
I think we've got a bit of time for questions, so if there are any questions, you want to put your hand up. Fastest finger first was over there. Sorry.
Hello,
Hi there.
great talk. Something I'm really interested in hearing more about is known unknowns. Things such as, I'm assuming there's data that isn't captured because people have turned off Google Analytics, so on. How do you manage expectations that the data might not be complete?
I'm really sorry, I couldn't hear that. Because of turned off Google Analytics. Yes, thank you very much. Actually, we have made a change to our analytics tracking just within the last week or so, in line with ICO guidance, to make sure that only people who explicitly opt in are using this. So there's obviously a large group of people who we don't know answers for. Where I'm at with that is, it's kind of always been the case, right? So people who are incredibly tech savvy could always have blocked Google Analytics and taken off the JavaScript tracking and all sorts of things. They tend to be people who, I would guess, don't trust government implicitly. So there's always been gaps in that. I kind of just have to roll with it a little bit. We have like a secondary cookie-free tracking system that we use, a company called Plausible, that kind of gives us a baseline of where people have been, so where 80% of people would be in terms of people who've opted in or opted out. So we've got an idea of how many people are not interacting with us and giving us information. So it gives us a sort of a slightly measurable. That's okay if you're dealing with really large numbers, but when you're talking about a few hundred people interacting with a service, I think you've just kind of got to take what you got and know that it's directional, right? So it's not important that 300 or 280 people read a page, it's that more or less. And what do you want people to do with a service? Do you want more people from a particular constituency, so you're going to market towards them? Are more people than that doing, are you moving in the right way? I think is kind of where you've got to, because it's never going to be perfect, to your point.
Fantastic. Thank you, Duncan. Hands up again, please. We've got a mic over there with Katrina.
Hi, my name is Farhan. I'm from London and I'm a web developer. So first of all, a quick one. Thank you so much for showing the hide this button page. I think that was brilliant. The way it works is really nice as well, because it sort of put that tab into Google and it opens a new tab, so the user's safe on the both sides. I was trying to find something similar on the GOV.UK side, and I couldn't. I don't know if there is anything or not, but I hope someone who's listening can maybe add that.
It's really important, yeah, I agree.
In terms of, within the civil service, we tend to have frameworks and technology, modern technology, come in quite late. It's been tested in private sector quite a lot, been used, almost sometimes gets old in private sector, and then we sort of, once we find it completely safe to use, then we bring it in civil service as a very new technology. How do you sort of think, especially in the Scottish side, that how do you come over that challenge, or do you look into, even if you don't implement it straight away in the civil service, do you look into the things what's being practiced in this?
So just that I understand correctly, we're talking about whether we understand Google Analytics 4 correctly, or
Sorry, no, it's not just Google Analytics. More so like framework side of things. Like for example, like we have adaptive Figma, but we haven't really adapted the latest frameworks of CSS like Flexbox or Grid or even Tailwind, stuff like that. So just like, how do you look at, like, my main question is, do you look at the private sector, see what's been practiced, test it, like as it goes, rather than it's been used for 5 years already?
Well, for sure, when we, the introduction of the new version of Google Analytics was a massive shock to our sort of system. And when we saw that was coming down the hill, obviously we go out and we look at what is being used in many other areas. The fact that Google Analytics 4 is kind of so universal, right? So many people use it is attractive, because what it means is that when you are providing those results through a design system to people who are not analysts and don't want to really learn how to use them, it's nice that it's understood by a large number of people. So actually, it's free, that's great, but the fact that so many people have used it means there's no additional training overhead. The other great thing about things being used by the private sector widely, there's a larger community out there, right? So there's lots of people who are going to write how to do things, like step-by-step guides, advice on how to use it. Now, the sort of paid alternatives are really interesting and great to us, but there's no huge community for us to learn from if it's used by quite a small niche. I hope that answers what we're talking about. We do look out, definitely. I would say as well, we look towards GDS as a great example for many of the things we do, and many of the things that they're looking at, we will also assess for our context as well. So we do look at larger organizations for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did we have any hands up back here? Oh, I spotted one before. No? Any more questions?
I think we're going here and around.
Okay, Malcolm.
Yeah, the quick exit button that you showed, I did something about with that some years ago, and I was just wondering how you went around distinguishing those who see a big red button and click on it just out of curiosity, and those who actually need to use it.
Yeah, I guess there is a question in all of whether you've interacted with something because it was good or because it was fascinating. The fact that it's used way more prevalently in the places we expect it to be used is our kind of indicator there. It's present on a group of pages that aren't quite as sensitive, and it isn't used nearly as often, I guess is our one there. It's not present on every page, though. I agree with the fundamentals of your point. But I guess you kind of have to. There's going to be a small constituency of people that just, as you say, what does this do? But I kind of question why they're on that page in order to see it. Usually there's a reason you're looking up instituting divorce proceedings or whatever it may be. So our kind of assumption is that people are going about a task that day. We can't always know. It's why teaming up analytics with kind of user research is doubly valuable, because actually you get a reasoning behind. I think we understand why you would use that button, but actually teaming it up with user search is obviously the double value.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one last question. Kat, did you want to?
Before we go to that, I'd like to just make a plug for the design system team, and if anyone is interested in another version of the Hide This Page, there is an Exit This Page button that's been designed, and in terms of performance analysts, we'd love anybody that's working out there and has implemented it or wants to implement it. We'd love feedback on it as well, but that is there for anyone to investigate and implement on their services.
Double plug, go check out the GOV.UK design system team show and tell from last year's design system day, which covers that Exit This Page button. But I'll pop over.
My assumption was you guys had hundreds of performance analysts working day and night.
Oh yeah, we've got them locked up in the basement.
Hi. So my question was pretty much what was based on your challenges around frameworks, and I was wondering, is there anything you see currently being used across different industries to do that effectively across different functions, being a user researcher? Is there any that you see working best?
Yeah, I'm really pleased you answered that question, because I meant to say that GDS are doing something slightly akin to this right now. So they have an initiative called Top 75. So it's a group of services that they consider the kind of the most important, the most high volume in the Gov.UK site. They are way further along it than we are. Like, we are struggling to find the same level of consistency that they've brought. But it's definitely one that central government have started on to try and use benchmarks and comparable value across services. definitely something I think that is useful, particularly when understanding the volumes of people that are using these things, whether it's easy to use and whether it's not. So yeah, GDS's top 75 is well worth Googling if you've got the time.
One more. Okay, we have time for one more. Fastest hand first.
Thank you. Do you know if many of your users are doing voice searches? And if you do, how have you responded to that?
There's no kind of device flag in it for Google Analytics that I know of right now. The way that I would normally look at it is way more of like the types of words that are put in, right? Because if you are sitting and having, laboriously type out free bus pass Scotland, you would normally talk, you're more conversational in your words. You're saying, how can I get a free bus pass in Scotland? So it's more the type of conversations that they're having. We don't see a lot of it in our internal search. Increasing volumes of it clearly coming into Google, and you start to see it for particular things. But actually, I don't see it so much, and I don't think people are tending to interact with our content through voice so much, because these are things that you tend to, it's like an action to take, right? I'm clicking this button, I'm filling in my details, or I'm doing this. You normally wouldn't with Alexa, right? Definitely seeing it more and more in terms of like information seeking, so like querying at the start of a journey, but far less at the point of interacting with our stuff.
I think that's it with the questions. We're going to give Duncan a break because he's very popular. But I think Duncan will be about, so round of applause.
Thanks very much, everyone.